The wilderness can shift from peaceful to perilous in a heartbeat, proving that no one is ever beyond nature's reach. From a harrowing grizzly assault on Montana officers to a frantic black bear rampage at an Idaho campground, these true encounters expose how swiftly serenity turns to survival. In this video, we'll explore 6 shocking stories where calm forests became battlegrounds, and even seasoned adventurers faced nature's untamed fury. On October 19, 2025, deep in the remote Montana wilderness where steep ridges cut through dense pine, and the wind carried the cold scent of early winter, Officer Mike Harris, Detective Laura Chen, and rookie Ethan Brooks patrolled a rugged trail after reports of illegal hunting in an area known for harsh terrain, unpredictable weather, and the kind of wildlife encounters that could turn deadly without a moment's warning. Although they had trained for emergencies, none of them expected their routine mission to turn into a fight for survival. Thick fog rolled over the mountainside like a heavy blanket, hiding every tree and boulder along the trail, turning the world gray and muffled. Hence, their own footsteps sounded unfamiliar as they moved along the narrow dirt path near their patrol SUV. At the same time, the forest remained disturbingly quiet, in a way that set Harris on edge because silence in those woods usually meant something was wrong, something big watching from somewhere unseen. The reports of gunshots earlier that day made them believe poachers had taken down a deer, leaving a carcass somewhere nearby. Although that alone was concerning, the smell of blood drifting through the cold air lured predators down from the hills, especially the grizzlies that dominated the territory and ruled the land with unchallenged power. Hence, the officers kept alert, scanning through the haze that seemed to thicken with every passing minute. Ethan, young and eager to prove himself, tried to focus despite the stress and the creeping chill seeping through his uniform. Still, nerves twisted in his chest because every shadow in the fog looked like something waiting to leap forward. The longer the silence lasted, the heavier the tension became, wrapping around them like a warning they couldn't understand until it was too late. Without any sound to announce its arrival, a massive grizzly burst from the trees with unbelievable speed and raw force, its fur bristling, muscles surging beneath its thick hide, and the size of the beast made the air feel too small around them as it locked onto the scent of the deer and the confusion of human presence blocking its path to food. The bear charged straight for the patrol SUV, smashing its full weight into the metal, causing the vehicle to rock violently on its suspension. At the same time, the sound of claws raking the doors echoed through the mountains like metal being torn apart by a machine. Harris felt a surge of terror, but also of instinct, as he scrambled to move, knowing distance and cover were the only thin shield they had against the furious animal. Ethan stumbled back, but the grizzly's powerful swipe connected with his shoulder and sent him crashing onto the ground, striking hard against a gear crate that toppled and pinned his legs briefly, so he lay dazed, breath knocked out, the cold earth biting into his skin as he tried to make sense of what had just happened to him. Detective Laura Chen's heart pounded so fast she could barely think, yet adrenaline drove her to grab at Ethan and drag him toward the rear of the SUV, where Harris had already dived behind the wheel in a desperate attempt to avoid the next strike. The bear circled the vehicle with measured, aggressive steps, while hot breath steamed from its jaws, and its deep growls seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath them. The grizzly pawed at the earth, sniffing the area with focused hunger and fury as it searched for the easiest target among the terrified humans. The officers knew the bear was capable of tearing through the vehicle if it chose to, because the damage already left behind showed that nothing would protect them for long if the animal committed to attacking again. Fog swirled around them as the bear's silhouette shifted and reappeared in sudden flashes, adding to the nightmare feeling that they were trapped in a world reduced to fear and movement and the blood pounding in their ears. In contrast, backup felt impossibly far away in the endless wilderness that surrounded them. Harris, shaking, reached into the storage compartment on his belt and found the emergency flare gun. This last resort tool offered no promise of survival, but at least gave them a chance to create a moment of hesitation in the unstoppable beast. And he knew that 1 second might be the difference between life and death. With the bear pushing its weight into the vehicle again, metal groaning beneath massive strength, Harris fired the flare into the air. The burst of red light and sizzling sparks shot upward into the fog, illuminating the giant animal in a sudden wash of brightness that made it recoil in confusion and snap its head upward in frustration. That brief hesitation was all they had, so Harris and Chen grabbed Ethan, who drifted in and out of consciousness, and rushed into the dense brush behind the ridge, forcing their bodies through branches and thorns that cut into them, but at least offered cover from the grizzly's immediate attention. They huddled in silence as the bear stomped around the vehicle, roaring in rage at losing its prey, while the minutes dragged by like hours, and the biting cold gnawed at them, especially Ethan, whose injuries and shock made his temperature drop dangerously low, leaving him trembling beneath his vest. At the same time, Chen pressed close to him, trying to share what little warmth she had left. Time passed slowly, and every sound made them flinch, expecting the bear to return at any moment, because the animal's persistence made it clear that it wouldn't give up easily on the food it smelled somewhere near them. Still, eventually the heavy footsteps and snapping branches faded into the distance as the grizzly finally retreated, leaving only the low rumble of wind moving through the trees and the thick silence of a forest that had witnessed a deadly confrontation. Ethan regained full consciousness with pain radiating through his bruised body and frost beginning to creep into his fingers and ears. At the same time, Harris and Chen tried to steady themselves, knowing they were fortunate to be alive, and fully aware that if the flare had failed, the story of that day would have ended on the dirt beside a shredded vehicle. When the fog thinned enough for them to see the battered SUV, they rose carefully. They returned to the trail, shaken to the core by a terrifying reminder that even armed officers with training and experience could be reduced to powerless survivors in seconds when they crossed paths with a creature built to dominate the wilderness, and walking away alive felt like a miracle none of them would ever forget. On August 14, 2022, the wilderness of Kodiak Island stretched across the horizon with thick spruce forests, uneven trails, damp soil, and rugged hills shaped by constant wind and rain. And three friends named Jared Collins, Lisa Meyer, and Marco Alvarez rode their mountain bikes along a narrow path that cut through the trees where sunlight flickered in small patches, making the ground ahead look safe one moment and risky the next, as they pedaled deeper into land where the wild remained firmly in control. The air smelled of salt from the distant coast and pine needles crushed under tires. Although the riders knew they were far from any help if something went wrong, the thrill of adventure made them feel bold and eager to explore, unaware that something powerful and dangerous had already noticed their presence. The three friends kept a steady pace, with Jared leading confidently, his wheels rolling over rocks and roots with the excitement of someone who loved the rush of speed and the challenge of staying balanced on the uneven terrain. At the same time, Lisa followed close behind, focused on avoiding obstacles that could send her tumbling. Marco brought up the rear, increasing his speed whenever the path opened up, and sometimes he glanced at the sky where eagles circled slowly, a reminder of the wildlife that thrived without fear of humans. They carried energy bars and sandwiches inside their packs, the scent of food drifting through the air. And while it seemed harmless to them, the smell was enough to attract the attention of a predator whose nose never missed such a signal in its territory. The forest was quiet except for the sound of tires crunching gravel and branches brushing against their shoulders as they passed. And none of them noticed how the silence sharpened, how the birds that called earlier had vanished, or how the sunlight dimmed behind thickening cloud cover as nature shifted into a tense stillness. The calm lasted only another second before a massive Kodiak bear crashed out of the underbrush with explosive force, tearing through thick ferns as if they were nothing, while its paws slammed into the trail with a weight that made the earth shake under the biker's feet. Jared saw the blur of fur and muscle only long enough to squeeze his brakes in panic, causing his front tire to catch on a stone and send him flying sideways into a low boulder, where he hit hard, scraping his arm and bruising his ribs as the shock stole his breath. Marco jerked his bike sharply to avoid the oncoming bear, the rear wheel sliding so close to the animal that he felt a rush of heat from its body as its claws slashed through empty air, the sound of that swipe leaving him sick with the realization that if he had moved a fraction slower, he would have been torn apart. Lisa had no time to react before the bear lunged directly at her, jaws snapping onto the handlebars of her bike with crushing strength that bent the metal instantly, and the force flung her off the trail into cold, wet leaves and tangled roots. Fear surged faster than any thought, and Lisa crawled away as fast as her shaking limbs allowed, while Jared struggled back to his knees, pain radiating through his chest with every breath. Marco sprinted toward a fallen log thick enough to offer some cover from the beast's reach, yelling to the others with frantic motions of his arms so they would follow. The three of them squeezed behind the rough bark barrier, their hearts beating too fast to count, while they tried to make themselves as small and silent as possible as the bear stomped across the trail, its massive body filling every bit of space in front of them. The Kodiak bear huffed and sniffed the air, its dark eyes scanning for movement as strands of saliva dripped from its mouth, and its muscles tensed with the readiness to strike again the moment a target revealed itself. It paced in slow circles, paws cracking branches underfoot. At the same time, it growled with frustration, its instincts caught between aggression and caution because although the humans were weaker, they were unfamiliar and confusing obstacles in its hunt for food. The minutes that followed felt stretched into an eternity as the three friends stayed frozen behind the log, unable to look away from the animal dominating the trail, every second thick with fear that the bear would leap over the barrier and end everything with a single blow. Lisa felt her fingers brush the emergency kit attached to her ruined bike frame and realized she had one tool that could shift the balance, so she grabbed a flare pen and aimed upward, even though her hands shook so badly she almost dropped it. With a desperate push, she fired the flare into the air. The sudden burst of crackling red light shot through the branches, reflecting off the bear's fur and creating a sizzling noise that made the giant animal rear up on its hind legs in startled confusion. Its roar thundered through the forest and echoed between the trees, a sound so deep and powerful that Jared felt the vibration inside his chest. Yet the flare provided a sliver of hope as the bear hesitated long enough for them to stay hidden. The bear paced again, circling the trail while its agitation increased, but instead of launching a new attack, it finally turned toward the deeper forest where the scent trail of easier prey likely lingered. With heavy, frustrated steps, it vanished into the trees while branches snapped loudly in its wake, each crack signaling a farther distance from the terrified riders. The moment the bear disappeared did not bring immediate relief because none of them wanted to believe they were safe until the sounds of movement faded completely. The silence returned, calm this time instead of threatening. When the fear finally loosened its grip enough for them to move, the three friends crawled out from behind the log and stood unsteadily, their legs trembling as adrenaline drained away, leaving behind exhaustion and pain where impacts and scrapes had already begun to swell into bruises. Their bikes lay damaged on the trail, Lisa's nearly destroyed, and the reality of how quickly a peaceful afternoon ride had turned into a deadly encounter settled heavily in their minds as they looked at each other, breaths visible in the cooling air, sweat chilled against their skin. Though they had survived with only minor injuries, the fear remained alive inside them, teaching a harsh lesson about the wilderness they thought they understood. Kodiak Island belonged first and always to the bears, and the reminder came with teeth and force that none of them would ever forget. On July 19, 2025, the late summer air carried a clean chill across the Kenai Peninsula as Ethan Clark hiked along a rugged cliff trail that wound above a cold river swirling far below. And the beauty of the landscape reminded him why he spent so much of his life exploring remote places where the wild still ruled. He moved carefully on the narrow path carved into the rocky slope, where each step demanded focus, because loose stones crumbled underfoot, and the slightest mistake could send him slipping toward the edge, where nothing waited except open air and the rushing water that cut through sharp boulders at the valley floor. His backpack felt heavy with climbing gear, extra clothing, and the packed lunch he planned to enjoy once he found a stable area to rest. Yet the weight never bothered him since he had trained for years to handle tough trails and unpredictable mountain conditions. The sun lit the surface of a waterfall ahead, spraying mist that sparkled like glass in motion, and Ethan paused to capture the scene with his camera, pleased with the moment of calm in a place that demanded respect and constant awareness. He stood close to the cliff wall to keep a safe distance from the drop, shifting his feet slightly when the stones under his boots shifted too easily, reminding him that this land accepted no careless behavior. He listened to the distant roar of the river, mingling with the crash of falling water, the wind sweeping along the ridge, and the occasional calls of ravens that tracked his progress like quiet forest watchers. He did not realize that the smell of the food in his pack drifted downward with the breeze, slipping into the nose of a hungry predator that patrolled the brush above the trail, where sunlight rarely reached the ground. Everything seemed under his control, yet nature changed its mood without warning, and danger approached with silent purpose. The first sign that something shifted came when the forest went quiet, and Ethan noticed that even the wind seemed to pause for an instant, as though the mountain itself held its breath. Before he could wonder why, Thick branches to his left cracked loudly with violent force, and a massive grizzly bear surged through the undergrowth with explosive power that left him frozen in shock. The bear's fur bristled with agitation, and its head swung sharply as it fixed its dark eyes on him, drawn closer by the smell of food and the presence of a stranger who did not belong in its territory. Ethan's heart slammed into his ribs as the animal advanced with deliberate steps that crushed the plants beneath its paws, its movements heavy and unhurried because it knew it already controlled the situation. Trapped between the bear and the cliff edge, Ethan tried to back away, but his shoulders pressed into the cold rock wall while small stones dropped from the ledge into the roaring river below, with soft splashes that barely reached his ears through the rising panic inside him. The bear lunged forward with terrifying speed and swiped a giant paw across his backpack, ripping through the outer fabric and sending him stumbling sideways hard enough that his shoulders slammed into jagged rock, pain shooting through the joint as he gasped and fought to maintain his balance near the edge. His boot slipped on the gravel, and the dizzying space below pulled at him for a terrifying moment before he managed to flatten his hand against the stone to stop his fall, dust showering down from the cliff as he struggled upright again with his legs shaking. The bear growled and advanced again, its jaws snapping near his shoulder, its breath hot and foul with the scent of half-digested food, and Ethan felt a sharp rake of claws scrape across his arm and ribs as the animal struck at him once more. His clothes tore, and a thin line of blood spread across his side, the sting of the wound barely noticeable under the overwhelming fear that surged through him like a fire racing through dry grass. He knew he could not outrun the beast or climb to safety with no stable holds nearby, so survival depended on whatever tools he carried and the thin chance that he could distract the predator long enough to escape. He fumbled for the flare stored in a side pocket of his pack, the zipper nearly jammed from the earlier swipe, and when his fingers finally closed around the cold metal tube, he snapped off the safety cap with frantic urgency. The flare hissed and erupted in crimson light that cut through the bright day, sparks spitting against the rock as he waved it toward the bear, making himself as large as possible in the tight space. The bear reared back slightly, confused by the sudden brightness and sharp sound. While it hesitated, Ethan grabbed one of his trekking poles. He slammed it against a rock repeatedly, each strike echoing across the cliffs with a harsh metallic clatter that seemed to irritate the animal further. The grizzly grunted and huffed, pacing along the narrow trail, searching for a better angle to attack without exposing itself to the strange burning object that mocked its authority. Its indecision lasted only seconds, but those seconds felt like a lifeline stretching just far enough to keep Ethan alive as he slowly began shifting sideways toward a section of trail where the cliff wall angled inward, promising a little more room and a chance to continue upward. At last, the bear lifted its head to catch the wind, ears twitching as it considered other scents and other opportunities. With a final rumble deep in its throat, it swung around and lumbered back toward the forest above the trail, leaving crushed plants and disturbed soil in its wake. Ethan remained pressed to the wall long after the animal disappeared. When he finally climbed to safer terrain, each movement felt like a slow return from the edge of a nightmare he could never fully forget, and he knew this encounter proved that even skilled mountaineers like him survived the wilderness only when the wild decided to let them go. On March 12, 2024, the Canadian Arctic stretched endlessly under a pale sky, the tundra a blinding expanse of ice ridges and drifting snow, and researchers Maya Sinclair and Noah Riley navigated the harsh landscape on snowmobiles, collecting data on ice seals far from the safety of their base camp, the wind slicing through their parkas as they passed pressure ridges and brittle ice that groaned faintly under weight. The air was sharp and clean, biting at exposed skin, and each carefully measured turn of the handlebars reminded them how unforgiving this land could be when human presence collided with nature's predators. They had traveled for hours, scanning the frozen sea and noting tracks of seals and gulls, unaware that another presence had been tracking them just as intently, drawn by warmth, scent, and the subtle vibrations of the machines on the snow. Noah led, weaving between jagged ice formations and soft drifts that threatened to throw the snowmobiles off balance, while Maya followed a short distance behind, scanning the horizon for cracks and ridges where pressure ice could collapse. Their radios were silent except for static, and their own engines sounded unnaturally loud across the white emptiness, carrying farther than sound should, signaling their intrusion to anything with a nose tuned to survival. From a ridge above the trail, a massive polar bear observed them with coiled strength, muscles flexing beneath thick white fur, eyes dark and calculating, movements measured for an explosive charge, and the air itself seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. The attack came without warning. The bear lunged down from a snowbank with astonishing speed, paws smashing into the ice and sending loose snow flying, its size overwhelming the landscape as it barreled toward Noah's snowmobile. He barely twisted the handlebars before the machine tipped sideways, hurling him across the ice where he slid, numb from shock and the freezing surface, scraping his palms and shoulder against hard snow and scattered ice shards. Maya skidded to a halt behind him, heart hammering, adrenaline surging, and she grabbed the flare mounted to her belt, knowing that any hesitation could be fatal. The bear circled the sleds, paws tearing at straps and equipment, crushing fuel containers and rending bags where the researchers had stored food and gear, its massive head swinging from one target to the other, jaws snapping with terrifying force. Noah struggled to his feet, chest heaving, blood from a shallow scrape warming on his gloves, and crawled toward the nearest safe patch of ice, praying the bear would not redirect its attention as he felt the full weight of vulnerability in a world dominated by creatures built to survive in ways humans could barely comprehend. Maya fired the flare into the air, sparks hissing as they fell into the snow, and the sudden burst of light startled the bear, forcing it to pause and reconsider the strange, threatening object. For a tense moment, time seemed suspended. The bear prowled, claws raking the ice, testing and sniffing, its breath forming clouds in the frozen air, muscles tensed for sudden action, and Maya pressed herself low on the snowmobile, revving the engine in short bursts to keep the animal's focus divided, every second stretching as the threat hovered closer than any human should endure. Noah crawled behind a ridge for partial cover, teeth chattering and limbs numb, while the bear pawed at equipment, shaking packs violently and snapping straps with a power that reminded them both that size and strength were absolute in this place. The bear circled again, assessing, frustrated by the flare's interruption, huffing and sniffing, its eyes following every twitch and movement. But eventually, a new scent on the wind, perhaps another seal or the faint trace of distant prey, pulled its attention away from the researchers. It turned, lumbering back toward the snowbank it had emerged from, paws leaving deep impressions in the soft snow as it climbed the ridge with a patient, deliberate power that spoke of dominance in the Arctic wilderness. The threat receded, but Maya and Noah remained frozen, bodies rigid, breathing ragged, every nerve alert to the possibility of a sudden return. Only when the bear disappeared over the ridge did they allow themselves to move fully, checking equipment and snowmobiles for damage. One sled was half crushed, with panels bent and straps shredded, while the other could still run but carried frozen debris and loose gear, a stark reminder that even moving vehicles offered no true safety in this environment. Injuries were minor, scrapes, bruises, numb fingers, but the psychological weight pressed heavily on them, the knowledge that survival had depended on seconds of reaction, a flare, and sheer luck. They restarted the snowmobiles cautiously, glancing behind at the ridge, engines humming a tense rhythm across the ice, aware that daylight offered little security when predators of such size could appear without warning. Every mile toward camp felt borrowed, every patch of ice a test of balance, and the Arctic, vast and silent once more, reminded them in its frozen, relentless way that humans were intruders in a land ruled by scale, strength, and instinct. By the time base camp emerged on the horizon, both researchers were exhausted, frozen, and bruised, aware more than ever of how quickly a routine day of fieldwork could turn into a battle for survival when nature decided to assert its power. On September 3, 2025, the morning fog hung thick in a remote park in Juneau, curling between pine trunks and settling over a narrow leaf-strewn trail that wound through mossy rocks and fallen logs, creating an eerie stillness broken only by the crunch of footsteps and the occasional rustle of small woodland animals. Liam Hayes moved carefully, boots pressing into damp soil, while his border collie, Scout, padded ahead with alert ears and a low growl in his throat, sniffing at the trail as though mapping the forest by scent and sound. Liam had hiked these trails countless times, familiar with the way the terrain shifted between soft moss, jagged roots, and the occasional slick patch of exposed rock. Yet the morning felt different. The fog heavier than usual, the air colder and sharper against his skin, carrying a tension he could not shake, even as sunlight struggled to pierce the clouded canopy. Scout's nose twitched as he paused at an indistinct scent, alerting Liam with a single bark that echoed unnaturally through the quiet pines. The dog's energy was infectious, and Liam adjusted his pack, scanning the undergrowth for signs of deer or other wildlife, unaware that something far larger than a deer had noticed them first. From the dense brush along the trail's edge, a black bear had been watching, its dark eyes fixed on movement and sound, muscles coiled beneath thick fur, sensing both curiosity and hunger as Scout's barking and the faint smell of a nearby carcass drew it closer. For a moment, time seemed suspended, the fog absorbing the usual forest sounds and leaving only the rapid pulse in Liam's chest as he and Scout moved along the narrow path. The bear struck with sudden violence, bursting from the shadows and crashing through ferns and saplings as if they were nothing, paws slamming into the trail with such force that loose stones rattled and leaves skittered in every direction. Scout yelped sharply as the animal lunged, and Liam reacted instantly, scooping the dog into his arms and stumbling backward over rocks and fallen logs, heart hammering as the bear pursued with terrifying precision. Its massive claws shredded the ground, snapping at roots and snapping branches underfoot, circling with measured patience and testing escape routes, as if the narrow trail had been designed specifically for its advantage. Liam felt the raw power of the animal in every movement, every swipe a reminder that instinct and size could easily overwhelm even the quickest human reaction. Liam kept moving, feet sliding over slick moss, boots catching on protruding roots, each step bringing him closer to safer terrain yet farther into the bear's awareness. He slammed a trekking pole against the trunk of a nearby tree, the sharp sound echoing through the mist like a warning, and he waved his arms with all the strength he could muster, shouting in short bursts of effort to make himself appear larger, louder, more unpredictable. Scout squirmed in his grip, whimpering but alert, claws scraping against Liam's forearm, and the dog's urgency seemed to feed Liam's determination to survive the encounter. The bear paused for a heartbeat, sniffing the air, nostrils flaring, jaw snapping with soft clicks, as if evaluating whether the human posed a challenge or merely another distraction. Still, the scent of food, combined with the dog's agitation, held its focus in place. Minutes stretched into a tense tableau, every second a mixture of fear and careful calculation. The bear's eyes followed every twitch, every movement of Liam and Scout, and it pawed at the trail in deliberate testing motions, pressing closer to the edge of the narrow path, weighing the risk of a direct attack against the curiosity that had drawn it out of hiding. Liam's legs burned with effort as he continued to retreat slowly, planting each step carefully on uneven rocks while keeping his torso rigid, signaling confidence despite the terror pounding through his body. He realized that the bear's aggression was tempered by caution, and he needed only a brief advantage to create a gap wide enough to escape. The strategy worked. Liam raised the trekking pole once more, striking at a nearby tree with deliberate force, then pivoted slightly to wave both arms while pressing Scout closer against his chest, maintaining a presence that seemed unpredictable to the bear. Its growl deepened, a low rumble vibrating through the fog, and it snapped its jaws again before finally deciding the risk outweighed the reward. With slow, deliberate steps, the black bear retreated into the underbrush, leaving behind scattered leaves, broken branches, and the faint echo of movement that dissolved into the heavy fog, each step away from the trail carrying the weight of authority and raw strength that reminded Liam how quickly the forest could assert itself. When the bear disappeared, Liam lowered Scout carefully, inspecting him for scratches and minor abrasions where claws had grazed during the encounter. Scout shook, mud and leaves clinging to his fur, and Liam wiped at his gloves and arms, muscles trembling from adrenaline and exertion. Both of them were soaked in sweat beneath layers of clothing, hearts still racing, acutely aware of how suddenly a quiet morning could erupt into life-threatening chaos. Liam surveyed the trail, noting displaced logs, crushed underbrush, and torn leaves marking the bear's path. And he realized that the forest, though familiar, remained a place of power where human knowledge and planning could only extend so far before instinct and size took control. As they continued along the trail at a cautious pace, Liam remained vigilant, scanning every shadow, every bend, every rustle, knowing that the wilderness had reminded them both that encounters like this could happen without warning and could turn deadly before a single reaction could be executed. Scout walked close, alert to every movement and scent, as if understanding the gravity of the moment they had just survived. By the time Liam and Scout returned to a wider, safer section of the trail, both were exhausted, clothes muddied, hands raw, but alive. Liam knew that mornings on the remote trail would never again feel routine, and Scout's alert gaze mirrored the tension they both carried as they moved forward, aware that the forest, patient and indifferent, had once again asserted its dominance over the small, determined intruders who dared to walk its hidden paths. On August 14, 2021, the mountains of central Idaho rose sharply against the late summer sky, their jagged peaks dusted with lingering snow, streams fed by glacial melt carving silver ribbons through dense pine and cedar forests. And Avery Thompson and her friends found a narrow clearing beside one such glacial stream to set up a small campsite, eager for a weekend of fishing, stargazing, and the quiet immersion of the wilderness. The ground was uneven, scattered with rocks and fallen branches. They worked carefully to pitch tents on the flattest sections while securing coolers and backpacks, unaware that a large, audacious black bear had been roaming nearby, drawn by the scent of packed food and the faint aroma of freshly caught fish lingering in their supplies. The air smelled crisp and cold as evening approached, carrying a subtle undertone of danger that none of them noticed, and the forest around them seemed calm, the rustle of leaves and occasional bird call masking the predator that had chosen to observe from the shadows. Avery moved between the tents, arranging supplies, checking straps and buckles, while her friends gathered firewood, each step careful on uneven soil and moss-covered roots that threatened to trip them. The stream whispered constantly beside them, water tumbling over smooth stones, and the forest seemed almost serene, yet beneath that calm lay the quiet stalking of the bear, muscles tensing beneath dark fur, nose twitching as it tracked the scents and sounds of humans, curious and confident in its strength. The bear crept closer, paws sinking slightly into the soft earth, careful to avoid snapping twigs that might announce its approach, drawn by the promise of easy food and the novelty of intruders in its territory. Avery left the clearing briefly to fetch water, her footsteps light but deliberate across the rocks and low brush, carrying the metal bucket she would fill from the glacial stream. In that brief moment, the bear moved with sudden explosive speed, surging into the campsite with terrifying efficiency. It smashed through the tent flap, claws tearing through fabric and poles, and overturned a cooler with a deafening crash, sending gear tumbling across the ground. Sleeping bags shredded under massive paws, backpacks flung aside as the bear's powerful snout rooted through containers, sniffing and pawing with intent, each motion demonstrating its strength and ability to dominate the small clearing in an instant. The sound of cracking canvas and the thump of overturned supplies echoed through the trees, the serene forest transformed in moments into chaos. Avery returned just as the bear investigated a bag of leftovers, heart pounding with terror as adrenaline surged. She froze for a fraction of a second, realizing the danger before instinct propelled her into action. One swipe of the bear's massive paw narrowly missed her, scattering pebbles and splintered wood at her feet, and she lunged toward a metal pot, slamming it against a nearby rock with every ounce of force she could muster, the reverberating clang piercing the crisp mountain air. Her screams added another layer of sound, unnatural and urgent, causing the bear to pause, ears swiveling, nostrils flaring as it assessed the sudden, unpredictable threat. It snorted, sniffed, and with one final glance at the overturned gear, lumbered toward the edge of the clearing, retreating into the forest with the casual dominance of a creature that understood it could return at will, leaving behind chaos, shredded equipment, and a shaken human party. The group quickly regrouped, hearts racing, muscles tense, eyes scanning every tree line and ridge as they assessed the aftermath. Sleeping bags were torn, tents partially collapsed, backpacks covered in mud and leaves, and the smell of fish and other food permeated the air, mingling with pine and the metallic tang of scraped metal from overturned gear. Minor bruises marked their arms and legs from tripping over scattered objects, and Avery's hands stung from gripping the pot so tightly during the confrontation. The bear had left no direct attack beyond intimidation. Still, the psychological weight of the encounter settled heavily on all of them, a reminder that even a seemingly calm campsite could be invaded and controlled by a predator's speed and intelligence in mere seconds. They moved cautiously through the clearing, gathering what supplies they could salvage, tossing spoiled or destroyed food into a small pile to prevent future attraction. At the same time, their minds raced with the understanding that survival required vigilance, even in a location chosen for its beauty and perceived safety. Every snapped branch, rustle in the undergrowth, or distant bird call now drew sharp, instinctive attention, and each glance toward the tree line carried the unspoken knowledge that the bear could return, or that another predator could appear without warning. The forest, once picturesque and welcoming, now takes on a quiet tension that seemed to press against them, reminding them that human presence in the wilderness is fleeting and subject to the dominion of animals designed to survive in harsh, unyielding environments. By nightfall, the group managed to secure what remained of their campsite, setting heavier objects around the perimeters and keeping gear close to avoid another sudden intrusion. The stream continued to flow relentlessly, glacial waters rushing over stones with steady patience, and the surrounding peaks were bathed in fading light. Still, the memory of the bear's sudden appearance lingered in every motion and thought. Even with careful planning, knowledge of wildlife behavior, and years of hiking experience, they had witnessed firsthand how quickly a routine wilderness getaway could escalate into a chaotic survival ordeal when opportunity, scent, and animal instinct intersected. Exhausted, bruised, and wary, they finally settled into tents that remained partially intact, each listening to the forest around them with a new respect for the creatures that dominated these remote mountains, and each silently aware that the calm of a summer evening was often just a fragile illusion.